When you are over 40 and have served 20 years in the Army, politeness stops being your first instinct, especially when you see a bunch of bastards bothering your 16-year-old daughter. But let me start from the beginning. I was driving home with Claire. We were listening to something from old cassette tapes. She grumbled, "Dad, the 90s are dead," and I nodded as if I were listening, just savoring the fact that I could drive around the city with my daughter without a mission, without orders, without a care in the world. "Dad, why are we going to the store again?" she grumbled without lifting her eyes from the glossy magazine. "We need to buy food. Unless you plan on living off air. I'll stay in the car, okay?" "Sure. Maybe you want some ice cream? Or your vegan mandrake root chips?" She only shook her head, eyes still glued to the pages. I got out. The pickup stayed in the parking lot near the entrance. I quickly ran through my list. Milk, bread, eggs, coffee. The classics. While waiting in line at the register, some old guy winked at me, probably admiring the pickup. I nodded back. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, I would be using that pickup to shove motorcycles across the asphalt like a tank plowing through Christmas trees on a training field. When I came out of the store, I immediately knew something was wrong. My pickup was boxed in tightly by two motorcycles, chrome-plated and covered in skulls, like someone had ordered bikers from the classic asshole catalog. 3 guys were standing around. One was leaning down by Claire's window, another was smoking, and the third, judging by his attitude, thought he was some kind of seduction god, wearing a leather jacket and a mustache even an 80-year-old porn star would be ashamed of. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go for a ride," I heard as I approached. "I don't want to. Leave me alone," Claire replied, clearly irritated but trying to keep her composure. "Oh, come on, we're nice guys. Beer, music, new experiences, new experiences." I cut in, stepping closer and setting the grocery bag on the hood. They all turned at once. I stood right behind them, calm, with the kind of eyes that had spent years looking death in the face like a nosy neighbor peeking over the fence. "Oh, look, Daddy's here," the mustached one smirked. "I'm not Daddy. I'm the judge. And you guys just got a life sentence for stupidity." One of them stepped toward me. "Listen, old man, we were just talking," I struck. My fist sank into his jaw with a dull, wet crunch, like smashing a watermelon with a baseball bat. The first guy dropped. The second managed to let out a yelp before he caught a knee in the gut. He doubled over, and I finished him with an elbow to the back of the head. The third lunged, fumbling for a knife tucked into his belt. "Oh, a knife? How original." I snorted, grabbed his hand, twisted it outward, and snapped his wrist. The sound was like breaking a fresh baguette. He screamed. "And now, pay attention," I said, straightening up. "Daddy's pissed." I pulled out the keys, climbed into the pickup, started the engine, and drove forward without looking back. One of the bikes crunched and collapsed under the wheels. The other, I carefully nudged aside with a bumper, just to maintain a shred of civility. Though honestly, I didn't care. Claire sat there with her mouth hanging open. "What was that, Dad?" "What exactly? You mean the store discounts? They had a coffee sale, by the way." "No, I mean..." She stammered, trying to comprehend what she had just seen. "Oh, that. You know, sometimes you just have to tidy things up. Like a spring cleaning. Just with bones." She stayed silent, then finally exhaled. "You're crazy, Dad." "Yeah, but I'm your crazy. And judging by your face, you still want that ice cream." 2 scoops. Chocolate and pistachio. With caramel. "Perfect," I smiled, flipping the turn signal and pulling out of the lot. Revenge is sweet, especially with caramel. In the rearview mirror, the bikers writhed on the asphalt. One tried crawling toward his bike, the other cursed, clutching at the few teeth he had left. I didn't bother looking back. They were lucky I was in a good mood. We drove home. Some old blues tune played on the radio. Claire silently finished her ice cream, and I could feel something stirring again inside my chest. Not rage, not anger, just the right feeling. Like I had done what needed to be done. Like I had nudged this screwed-up world one step closer to justice. "Dad." "Yeah." "If Mom asks what happened to the bumper, tell her it was a deer." "A deer?" "Downtown. A deer with an engine. Totally logical." She snorted, and then she laughed. Really laughed for the first time in a long time. And it felt better than any victory. The workday dragged on like gum stuck to the sole of a boot. Papers calls, more papers. I was already dreaming of a cold beer and some peace when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Amanda. Strange. She usually didn't call. Hello. I answered, setting the folder aside. Mr. Stephen. A tearful voice came through the line. It's Amanda. A cold chill stabbed through me. Amanda, what's wrong? Claire. Claire left for home. She was supposed to text me when she got there, but she hasn't. I'm texting, calling, nothing. She always texts immediately, and now. Her voice broke into sobs. Inside, I froze. Claire was always responsible. Goddamn always. If she wasn't answering, something was seriously wrong. Where are you? Where did she leave from? We were at Starlight, the cafe. She said she wanted to head home early because of a headache. I jumped up from my chair, grabbed the keys off the shelf. All right, Amanda. I'll handle it. I hung up and immediately started calling Claire. Ringing again. The subscriber you're trying to reach is unavailable. Cursing under my breath, I shot out of work, not caring about anything else. The car screeched as it tore away from the lot, tires screaming against the asphalt. My heart hammered against my ribs, so hard it felt like it would burst out. Just be home. Please just be home. I sped onto our street, flung open the door, not even bothering to shut the car. Inside the house was a strange, heavy silence, thick like sticky syrup. Claire, I shouted, walking through the hallway. Claire, are you here? No answer. I moved further in, pushed open the door to her room. Empty. The bed was neatly made, everything in place. But my heart was already sinking into emptiness. I turned and headed toward the master bedroom. And that's when I saw them. Some asshole was fucking my wife. Right there on our bed. In my goddamn spot. Blood rushed to my head. I took a step forward, and then something heavy slammed into the side of my head. The world shook, blurred, and I collapsed to my knees. Well, I heard a mocking voice. Who do we have here? Our little hero? They grabbed me by the hair and yanked my head upward. My vision swam, but I managed to make out two brutes looming over me. Real slabs of meat. One had a spider tattoo on his neck. The other grinned like a jackal. And there he stood, the same asshole who had been fucking Chloe. Tall, wiry, with short stubble and a smug smirk plastered across his face. Following behind him, clutching a bathrobe around herself, was Chloe. Hair disheveled, lips swollen from kisses. I tried to fight back, but the thugs held me tight. The man stepped closer and leaned down. My name's Brian Redford, he said, savoring the moment. Remember that name. It'll be the last one you ever hear. He turned to his men. This is the guy who beat you up outside the store. Brian sneered. Doesn't look like much now. Lying there like a pig, ready for slaughter. The thugs exchanged glances, one of them letting out a nervous chuckle. Brian walked over to Chloe and wrapped an arm casually around her waist. You know how I met your little wifey? He asked me. Saw her once at a bar. Drinking alone, bored, looking all sad and miserable. We started talking, and it turned out, he paused dramatically, she needed a real man. Not a pathetic rag like you. Chloe sneered wickedly. A real man, she added, curling her lips, not a miserable bore who only fucks according to a schedule. I clenched my fists, but the goons only pressed me harder against the floor. Where's Claire? I hissed, barely keeping my voice human. Brian grinned. He snapped his fingers. From the next room, they dragged my daughter out by her hair. Claire struggled, trying to break free, but the man held her like a doll. A red mark from a slap was already blooming on her cheek. Your little girl's coming with us, Brian said. It's about time she learned what it's like to be with real men. I'll be her new daddy. And you? He leaned in closer, the stench of cheap tobacco hitting my nose. We'll teach you some respect. Right before you die. I roared with rage, trying to break free, but a brutal punch to my gut knocked the air out of my lungs. Darkness closed in on my vision. Knock him out, Brian said lazily. The last thing I saw was one of the brutes raising something heavy and shiny over my head. The consciousness that had barely returned began to fade again under the pressure of pain. I could feel someone holding me down by the shoulders, roughly pinning me to the floor. My head was splitting, my lips were busted, my shoulders throbbed from twisted joints. They had dragged me somewhere, but I had no idea where I was. Standing in front of me was Brian Redford, his grin gleaming under the dim ceiling lamp. In his hand, he held a knife, long, serrated along the blade. "Well, soldier boy," he sneered, rolling the knife between his fingers, ready to feel what real defeat tastes like. I stayed silent, just staring him in the eyes. "Nothing to say?" Brian chuckled. "Figures. What else can you do?" He crouched in front of me and ran the blade lightly across my cheek, as gently as a painter with a brush. A thin stream of blood trickled down. "Huh. Look, boys, he's not even flinching," Brian said, turning to his goons. "Like an old piece of meat." They all laughed, like stupid hyenas. Chloe was there too, standing off to the side, watching with bored indifference. "Darling," she drawled with fake sweetness, "just don't ruin him too much. I still want to see him wheeze when we leave." "Don't worry, babe," Brian replied. "He'll still twitch for a while. Although," he paused thoughtfully, "maybe I'll make him half a man. You know how they say, half a husband, half the problems." The goons burst out laughing again. Brian grabbed my chin and forced my face upward. "Look at me, old man. This is going to be fun." He slowly dragged the knife across my chest, shallow but deliberate, leaving a long red trail. I clenched my teeth, refusing to give them even a single groan. "Whoa," one of the goons said in surprise. "This guy's solid." I would have been screaming like a bitch at a country festival by now. "Yeah, he's got bigger guts than you, Bobby," the second one smirked. "Or maybe you ain't got any guts at all." "Shut up, Joe," Bobby snapped. "I just respect knives, okay?" Brian kept working on his art. He carefully carved some crap into my chest. Looked like a letter B, most likely in honor of his sick ego. "There we go," he said, admiring his handiwork. "Now you'll carry my mark forever, asshole." Then he stabbed the knife into my thigh. Pain exploded like a bomb, but I still stayed silent. "Shit, he's definitely not from around here," Joe snorted. "Locals would have shit themselves and crawled off by now." "Maybe his mom gave birth to him in a bulletproof vest," Bobby chuckled. They all laughed. Even Chloe smirked, rolling her eyes. And just as Brian raised a knife for another cut, his phone rang. The sharp ringtone shattered the merry execution atmosphere. Brian grimaced. "Who the fuck?" He pulled out the phone, glanced at the screen, and his face turned serious. "All right, boys," he said, wiping the knife off on my sleeve. "Fun's postponed." He turned to Chloe. "Come on, babe. We got urgent business. These clowns are in good hands." Chloe nodded like she couldn't care less. "Just don't forget to wipe your boots after this, darling," she said lazily. Brian grinned, slapped her ass, and headed for the door. Before stepping out, he turned back. "Boys," he said, "enjoy yourselves. Just don't kill him too quickly. I wanted to have time to say goodbye to this world." "Got it, boss," Joe answered, spinning a metal crowbar in his hands. The door slammed shut, and then the real hell began. They pinned me to the floor again. The first kick landed in my stomach, hard, booted, and brutal. "Ik hoofd, folding over painfully." "Well, hero," Joe's voice came in my ears. "How much fun can you handle?" Bobby laughed and swung the iron rod into my ribs. I felt something crunch inside. "Bet he's gonna look like chicken liver by morning," Joe said, kicking me in the shoulder. I gasped but still kept silent. "Hey, Bobby," Joe said. "Want to play a game? See who gets him to scream first?" "Hell yeah," Bobby answered, gripping the crowbar with both hands. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw started to ache. Bobby began methodically beating my legs. Each hit exploded through me with white-hot pain. "Come on, Daddy," he yelled. "Scream for us. Give us a little concert." I spat blood onto his boot. "You little shit." He roared and struck even harder. Meanwhile, Joe picked up a pair of pliers. "Well, if your mouth's so stubborn," he said, grinning, "let's work on your fingers." He grabbed my pinky finger on my left hand. "Here comes a little surprise, old man." And with a sickening crunch, he twisted it backward. I rasped in pain, but still refused to give him a scream. "Man, what a tough nut." Joe hooped. "I'm actually curious now. Can we break him or not?" Bobby kicked me in the back. "Listen, Joe, this guy's got to be special forces or something. You don't meet this kind of crazy at the local bar." "Then we got to get creative," Joe said, lowering the pliers onto another finger. I closed my eyes. I had to endure. Just a little longer. Consciousness trembled on the edge. I could barely feel the fingers of my left hand. Dislocated joints throbbed with a dull, tearing pain. Above me, Their laughter echoed, dumb and animalistic, like butchers at a slaughterhouse. They were having fun, beating me however they pleased, thinking I was already broken. They were wrong. When you have gone through real war, through prisons and deserts, through camps where rats gnawed on people alive, you become something else. You do not forget. You simply sleep next to that beast inside until someone is stupid enough to wake it. And today, these bastards made that mistake. I waited. I waited for the moment. And it came. Joe came at me with the pliers again, grinning, anticipating the pleasure of twisting another finger. He leaned in too close, too confidently. I jerked my head upward. A heavy thud. My bony forehead smashed into his nose with a satisfying crunch. Joe screamed, staggering back and dropping the pliers. I rolled, using my elbows and knees, snatching the pliers into my battered hand. Bobby didn't immediately realize what had happened. He swung the iron rod at me, but I ducked to the side, tumbling away from the blow. Lying on the floor, I hurled the pliers at his face. A perfect throw. The pliers struck Bobby right in the eye socket. "Aya!" He howled, clutching his face. Minus one eye, asshole, I rasped, struggling to get up. Joe, despite his broken nose, rushed at me. I stuck out my leg. He stumbled and caught a knee to the jaw as he fell. His jaw cracked like a dry branch. He gasped and collapsed onto the floor. I threw myself on top of him, grabbed his right arm, and, growling, twisted it backward until the elbow popped with a sickening crack. "How's that, tough guy?" I snarled into his ear. "Feeling like a little girl yet?" He squirmed onto me like a worm. I didn't let go. I grabbed his left arm and snapped it the same way. One elbow, then the other. Everything left of his strength dissolved into spasms and whimpering. Bobby staggered around, blind in one eye, clenching his teeth in panic. I stood up and spotted in the corner of the shed a huge hammer, clearly meant for some heavy work. A grin crawled across my face by itself. "What a lovely gift," I muttered. I walked over to the hammer. Heavy, two-handed, old as rage itself. I returned to Bobby. He was trying to crawl away, sniffling and howling. "Were you headed, sweetheart?" I asked, lifting the hammer above my head. We were having such a lovely evening. He shook his head, sobbing and mumbling something unintelligible. Too late. I brought the hammer crashing down onto his jaw. The blow was so powerful that half of his face rippled. With a crunch and a burst of blood, his lower jaw simply tore away from his head. Blood gushed like a fountain from his eye socket, his mouth, his nose. He twitched, gasped, and went still. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve. "One down," I muttered. "Where's the second?" Joe was still twitching on the floor. Even without arms, he was trying to crawl away. "Hey, cowboy," I called out to him. "What do you think you're going in such a hurry?" He croaked something covered in snot and blood. I approached him and smashed the hammer into his face with such force that his skull cracked and blood sprayed across the walls of the shed. Joe shuddered and went still. I stood over their bodies, breathing heavily, like an engine running on its last fumes. Inside me, there was only cold satisfaction, just like the good old days. I lifted my gaze to the shed door. There was still someone there. I heard footsteps. Anyone else want an anatomy lesson? I rasped, tightening my grip on the hammer. The door burst open. Two men stood on the threshold, both armed with pistols. They saw me, saw the bodies on the floor, and froze for a moment. I hurled the hammer at one of them. The heavy tool smashed into the first man's chest with a crunch of ribs. He flew backward, dropping his weapon. The second managed to lift his pistol. A shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past my ear. I lunged forward like a beast. My hand clamped around the wrist, aiming the pistol. I jerked sharply, snapping the joint. The guy squealed. I punched him in the throat. He choked, dropping the gun. I picked it up. "Thanks for the delivery, asshole," I muttered, slamming the magazine back into place. I scanned the shed. No more movement. I stepped outside. The night was cold. The air was heavy with the stench of blood and oil. Voices echoed somewhere in the distance. Dogs barked. I pressed myself against the wall, hiding in the shadows. I counted my breaths. I looked for a way out. But most of all, I searched for Claire. She wasn't here, and I swore I would find her and spill as much blood as it would take. Because now, I wasn't just a father anymore. I was their judgment, and the reckoning had only just begun. I walked down the street, feeling the dried blood on my skin crack with every step. The pain in my body was thick and sticky, like mud clinging to boots, but it only fueled my anger. Every punch, every broken rib, was fuel for the fire, now consuming me from within. I knew exactly where I was going. The biker bar Red Cobra was located on the outskirts of town, past the old railway bridge. A place where decent people didn't even dare to look. A place that smelled of sweat, blood, gasoline, and cheap bravado. I was heading there with one thought in mind: to find Brian and take away everything he dared to call his life. I abandoned the pickup 3 blocks away. Didn't want to give them a head start. Let them think I was just another idiot who wandered into the wrong place. As I approached the Cobra, the music inside was roaring so loudly the walls vibrated. 2 guards stood at the entrance, one a mountain of muscle on 2 legs, the other a pathetic Elvis impersonator in a leather jacket. They stared at me like I was a dead dog. "Hey, Grandpa," one said, eyeing my torn jeans and dried blood. "You sure you got the right door? The hospital's 2 blocks over." I said nothing. I just opened the door and walked in. A wave of silence washed over the room as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. All the usual types were there: fat bellies with beards, wiry psychos with neck tattoos, twitchy rats with knives tucked into their belts. For a moment, they just stared at me, and then the laughter exploded. "Look at this, guys," bellowed a particularly fat bastard at the bar. "Looks like Halloween came early this year." "Hey, bum," someone from the right called out. "You want a bottle of tears or a psychiatric insult?" I walked forward, feeling the floorboards creak under my boots. "I'm looking for Brian Redford," I said evenly, tightly. Silence hung for a split second, then another explosion of laughter. "Brian?" The fat guy echoed. "Buddy, he's old enough to be your daddy. Though judging by your face, even the orderlies would make better daddies for you." "Hey," another chimed in, scratching his hairy gut. "Maybe you should patch those holes in your stomach before you play with toys." I kept standing there, staring straight ahead. Inside, everything was going cold, turning to ice. "You got a chance to walk out of here alive?" I said, staring straight at the fat man behind the bar. "Just tell me where he is." The fat man smirked and spat on the floor. "Go to hell, old man." Wrong answer. I walked up to the bar. The fat man didn't even have time to realize what was happening. I grabbed the nearest bottle, smashed it against the edge of the counter, and before the shards even hit the floor, I plunged the jagged glass into his throat. He gurgled, clutching at his neck as he collapsed backward. Silence shattered, and then they all charged at me like a pack of wolves. The first was a redhead with brass knuckles. I ducked under his swing, grabbed his wrist, and snapped his arm at the elbow with a sickening crack. He howled, but I was already grabbing his head and smashing his face into the bar. The crunch of his nose and the splatter of blood on the wood were music. The second lunged at me with a knife. I sidestepped, caught his wrist, and drove his own blade under his ribs again and again until he sagged to the floor, bleeding out. The third, the biggest, with a dragon tattoo curling around his neck, grabbed me by the jacket. "You're gonna die here, fucker," he screamed. "I'll pencil it in," I growled, and drove my boot into his knee. The knee bent the wrong way with an ugly crunch. He screamed, but I already ripped the club from his hands and swung into his temple. His skull cracked like an old clay pot. They hadn't expected this. They were used to dishing out pain, not receiving it. Now, every step I took was a death song. I grabbed a stool and smashed it over the head of the next idiot, some clown with earrings in both ears. He collapsed onto a table, blood gushing from his scalp. Someone swung a chain at me. I caught it, yanked him toward me, and rammed my fist into his throat. He collapsed, gasping for air. I fought with whatever was at hand: broken bottles, knives, chains, stools. Every blow was precise, deliberate, ruthless. Their screams blended into one endless wail. Those still standing began to back away, but I didn't allow it. I grabbed one of the last standing, a guy in a baseball cap, and slammed him to the ground, twisting his arms behind his back. "Where's Brian?" I roared into his ear. "I in the port." He shrieked. "The port. They got a deal. Weapons, I swear." I shoved my elbow into his spine, feeling something pop under my hand. He gasped, losing consciousness. Thanks for the info, I muttered and snapped his neck. The bar was in ruins. Blood soaked the floor. Bodies and wounded men lay scattered like trash after a storm. I walked through the wreckage, stripped a motorcycle key off a corpse. On my way out, I grabbed a gas can. A little souvenir. Assholes, I said aloud and splashed gasoline over the floor. I lit a match and dropped it. Flames whooshed upward, the heat scorching my face. I mounted the motorcycle, started the engine. The red CROWBAR bar was an inferno behind me as I roared off into the night. Ahead was the port, and the meeting Brian would remember for the rest of his short, miserable life. The ride to the port took less time than I expected. Maybe when rage is boiling in your veins, the bike just carries you faster toward the blood you're meant to spill. I pulled up to an old warehouse on the outskirts. A place so dead, even the seagulls were afraid to shit without permission. Huge, rusted containers stood scattered like giant tombstones in a morgue. I killed the engine 100 meters away and dismounted. From here, on foot, like a predator, the air stank of salt, oil, and the filth people hide from the law. I moved through the shadows between the containers. Silent steps. Only the whisper of the wind over ropes and rusted steel. And then I saw them. About 20 men stood in a semicircle around a stack of crates. Bikers, some tattooed, some wearing vests, many armed, shotguns, rifles. In the center, Brian, strutting like a rooster at a fair, shouting about a new era of power and weapon shipments, gesturing wildly. Standing nearby was Chloe, all puffed up, pouting like a spoiled bitch, wrapped in a short jacket and tight jeans. I crouched behind a container, listening. These rifles are clean, Brian was telling the partners. No serial numbers. Tested. We need to expand our influence. And this is our golden ticket. What about the cops? Asked a guy in a baseball cap. Brian laughed. With his firepower, the cops will be sucking our exhaust. They all roared with laughter like a flock of dumb turkeys. I grinned in the dark. Time for the show. I slipped through another gap between the containers, closer to the group. In my pocket, I found what I had taken from the bar. A knife, a short length of chain, and a small pistol with 3 rounds. Enough. The rest I would do with my hands. I emerged from the shadows just as one of the guards turned away to light a cigarette. The first step, always decisive. I drove the knife under his ribs and clamped a hand over his mouth. He gurgled, twitched, and slowly crumpled to the ground. I quickly snatched a shotgun and moved on. The group was still engrossed in their deal. I raised the shotgun, pulled the trigger. The nearest guy dropped instantly, half his chest torn away. There was a heartbeat of silence, and then the panic erupted. "We're under attack." Someone screamed. Bikers scrambled for their weapons. Too late. I moved forward, death in a leather jacket. Another shot. The guy in a vest flew backward into the dirt. A shot. The tattooed musclehead's rifle flew out of his hands, followed by a crimson fountain spraying into the air. I moved fast, without hesitation. Someone lunged at me from the side with a knife. I met him with the stock of the shotgun, right into his jaw. His lower jaw crunched and flew somewhere into the grass. "Smile, motherfucker," I muttered while reloading. Another guy let loose a burst from his rifle. I dodged to the side. The bullet zipped past. I hurled a piece of chain at him, hitting him square in the eye. He screamed, clutching his face. I grabbed his rifle. Now I had a real say in this conversation. "Everybody freeze," I shouted, firing into the crowd. Screams, gunfire, blood. I moved like a storm, tearing through everything in my path. One of them dropped to his knees, begging mercy. I politely shot him in the throat. "Mercy's in a different department," I said coldly, reloading. Bodies already littered the ground around me. The survivors tried to flee. Useless. I fired in short, controlled bursts, cutting them down one by one. One of them dove for cover behind container. I circled around, catching him as he tried to slip away. Shot him in the gut. He collapsed, clutching his wound. I walked up and leaned over him. "How does it feel, watching your gut spill out?" I asked. "Picturesque, huh?" He just gurgled. I shot him in the face. Done. Silence. I stood in the center of the killing field. Only blood, smoke, and dead bodies remained. And just two figures were still alive, Brian and Chloe. They had stood in shock when all hell broke loose. Now, they were running. Brian, grabbing Chloe by the hand, dragged her toward the warehouses. I smirked, tightening my grip on the rifle. The lovebirds are trying to escape, I muttered. Only I'm the best player in this game. I moved after them. The damned bastards finally realized they weren't getting out of here alive. Brian and Chloe bolted toward a parked pickup, jumped in, and roared away, tires screeching and leaving black scars on the asphalt. I didn't bother trying to chase them on foot. There, off to the side, sat an abandoned white Chevy, doors open, keys still in the ignition. Like fate itself had tossed me a ride to continue the party. I jumped behind the wheel, checked the gas tank. Nearly full. I grinned. Let's take a little ride. Assholes, I muttered and slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The engine roared, and I tore after them, headlights slicing through the darkness, windshield collecting a fine dust from the road. The chase was on. Brian swerved wildly, trying to shake me, cutting corners, bouncing over potholes. But I was too furious to lose them. I chased relentlessly, closing the distance meter by meter. Abandoned warehouses, rusted fences, crumbling hangars flashed past. The grim beauty of the city's underbelly. Suddenly, Brian veered sharply to the right, crashing through the half-collapsed gates of a base. Almost immediately, two black cars shot out behind him, blocking the road like hyenas. Their headlights blinded me for a second. Gunmen poured out of the vehicles. I muttered. Called in his friends. They opened fire without warning. Bullets hammered into the Chevy's hood, windshield, and roof. Metal shrieked. Glass shards rained into the cabin. I pressed the gas pedal even harder. Didn't break. Lead whizzed around me, but I stayed calm like a rock. When only about 20 meters separated me from the barricade, I yanked the door handle and leapt out. The asphalt slammed into my shoulder. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, but I rolled and froze in the shadows. The driverless Chevy screamed forward and slammed into the barricade. And then, exactly what I expected. The thunderclap of an explosion rocked the world around me. A fireball shot into the sky, tossing one of the black cars aside like a toy. Men screamed, blinded by the blast and heat. I rose to my feet, dusted myself off, and moved toward them, smiling. So, boys, who's next for a free amputation? I muttered, drawing my knife. Smoke coiled above the wreckage. The remaining gunmen, coughing and cursing, stumbled around the burning wreck, trying to figure out where I had gone. Wrong move. I came up from behind, like a ghost. I drove my knife into the first man's kidney and twisted, feeling his body crumple in convulsions. Shoot, don't call for mommy, I whispered into his ear as I lowered him to the asphalt. The second one turned toward the groan. Too late. I snatched up a shard of metal rebar and hurled it into his head. A heavy thud. His skull cracked like an overripe melon. He collapsed onto the burning debris. The third managed to raise his rifle and shout. I found him. His words were cut short as I hurled my knife. The blade buried itself in his throat, silencing him mid-sentence. He gurgled, drowning in his own blood, and fell. I grabbed his rifle. Thanks for the gift, brother, I chuckled. Now I had firepower and a hell of a lot of rage. And the base ahead. I moved forward, sticking to the shadows along the walls and containers, death stalking its debtors. The base was small but packed. Warehouses, storage sheds, guard shacks, fences strung with barbed wire. Armed scumbags swarmed everywhere, shouting orders, searching for me. Find him. Someone screamed. The bastard killed our men. Find him and shoot on sight. I smiled in the darkness. Hint, assholes. You're already too late, I whispered. The first one I took out was on the watchtower. I climbed silently up the ladder, waited until he turned away, and drove my knife into the base of his skull. He twitched and slumped over. I lowered his body down carefully, like a sack of rags. The next was by the hangar, smoking. I crept up behind him and slashed his throat in one swift move. He gurgled, dropping his rifle. I caught it midair. Hey, no smoking in restricted areas, I muttered, stepping over him. Next, two more patrolling the warehouse. I waited until they separated, then snatched one around the corner. I broke his neck slowly, so the other wouldn't hear more than a soft crack. The second turned around, but all he saw was me lunging straight at him. We collided. He was tough, trained, it was obvious. But I was meaner. Grabbing his ear, I drove my thumb into his eye socket, pressing the eyeball deep into his skull. The guy howled like a wounded dog, but immediately after, he took a knife to the liver. I eased him down to the ground. Paused, looking around. Far off across the yard, I spotted Brian's familiar figure. He was dragging Chloe by the hand, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Afraid, and he damn well should be. "I'm coming for you, rats," I muttered. I moved on. There were 5 more in my way. I wasn't in a hurry. I gave each of them my full attention. One, I rammed a broken pipe in his gut, twisting it until his intestines spilled out. Another, I pumped a burst into his groin, making him wail on his knees before finishing him with a bullet to the forehead. The third, I sliced through his hamstrings and let him watch his life drain from him, drop by drop. "Enjoy it, brother," I whispered as I moved on. The last 2 tried to set up some kind of defense behind a Jeep. I tossed a gasoline-soaked bottle onto the vehicle, lit from a burning piece of debris. The flames erupted instantly. They screamed and bolted straight into the open and straight into my sights. 2 short bursts, and it was done. Silence. The base was cleared. Only Brian remained, and that pathetic whore Chloe. I moved toward them, feeling the ground grow redder beneath my boots, and the blood was just starting to flow. The concrete floor beneath me was littered with spent casings, empty magazines, and pools of blood. I advanced slowly, carefully, like a wolf closing in on its final prey. Ahead stood a small concrete hangar. The door was half open, frantic whispers and scraping sounds coming from inside. I could already smell their fear. Thick, sticky, clinging to the air like cheap whiskey. I crept closer, just about to kick the door open, when all hell broke loose. A barrage of wild gunfire exploded from inside. Bullets hammered the walls. Concrete splinters flew everywhere. I dove to the side, crashing behind an overturned crate. "Come on out, motherfucker!" Brian roared, spraying the surroundings wildly with a machine gun he was dragging around like his last lifeline. Behind him, shrieking like a rabid cat, Chloe burst out, firing an assault rifle in every direction without even aiming. Bullets whistled past me. One grazed my jacket sleeve, another nicked my ear. I peeked around the crate. Right next to them was a barrel, carelessly topped with a bundle of grenades. Above it, a shelf with open cans of superglue. A disgusting combination. And when Chloe, screaming incoherently, unleashed a burst in my direction, one of the bullets clipped a can of glue. Sticky liquid rained down, coating the grenades in thick, viscous gunk. I laughed through gritted teeth. Chloe, oblivious, grabbed the nearest grenade, pulled the pin, and couldn't let go. The grenade stuck firmly to her hand. "What the fuck?" She shrieked, trying to shake it off. I leaned out from behind the crate to watch the show. "Glue's stronger than your stupidity, sweetheart," I yelled. Chloe's eyes bulged in terror. The explosion was bright, deafening, like the hammer of a war god. Her body literally blew apart. Chunks of meat, bone, and torn clothing sprayed across the area. The blast wave hurled Brian to the side, his machine gun flying in the other direction. I stood up, brushed myself off, and walked forward slowly. Brian writhed on the floor, clutching his head, blood running down his face. I reached him and, without a word, drove my boot into his gut. He choked and curled up. "What's the matter, champ?" I leaned over him. "Where's the fanfare? Where's your crowd of whores?" He just croaked in response. I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him up. "Where's Claire?" I roared, shaking him like a rag doll. "Fuck you," he rasped. I punched him in the teeth. "Didn't catch that." "Say it again." She's at the container yard," he bleated. "Redford Shipping, west side of the port, container C-17, black 1. I grinned. "See how easy it is to communicate?" Brian spat on my boot. You're dead." I snorted. "Funny. That's what they all say. And yet here you are." I threw him back onto the concrete. He groaned, trying to crawl away. Nearby, torn-off metal doors lay twisted on the ground. Not far from them stood a pneumatic hammer hooked to a generator. The idea came naturally. I picked up the hammer, dragged the doors closer, and, deftly shifting the pneumatic hammer, I nailed Brian, his clothes, his skin, his arms to those doors. Each strike drove staples through fabric and flesh, pinning him to the metal like a bug onto a corkboard. He screamed, "I'll kill you." He roared, choking on his own spit. I finished and stepped closer. He was spread-eagled against the doors, like some cheap knockoff of a martyred saint. I smiled. "No, Brian," I said quietly. "I'm the one who's going to kill you." In the corner of the shop stood an old asphalt paver. Big, massive, rusty. I walked over and fired up the engine. It roared like an ancient dragon, spewing clouds of black smoke. I aimed the machine straight at Brian. He screamed, thrashing against the doors, trying to tear free. Useless. The asphalt paver rumbled toward him, slow and relentless, thundering like the end of the world. "Please," he screamed. "Please, no." I squatted down and smiled. "You wanted respect, Brian? Here's your respect, soaked into the concrete." And I watched as the front iron roller crushed into his gut. Watched as his bones cracked, his flesh ballooned grotesquely. Watched as his insides burst outward, splattering the wall like a ruptured water balloon. His final scream was swallowed by the roaring engine. And then there was only blood and silence. I stood up, wiped the blood from my face, and turned toward the exit. Claire was waiting for me, and now no one would ever touch her again. After Brian's death, a strange, crushing silence settled over the workshop. Time itself seemed to freeze, the air vibrating with the stench of blood and scorched metal. I stood there, feeling the adrenaline ebb, leaving behind only heavy exhaustion. But I couldn't stop yet. Claire was still waiting. Somewhere out there, among the damn shipping containers, among the steel and the grime, among those who thought they could hide her from me. I grabbed a full-mag rifle from one of the fallen bodies, checked the rounds, cocked the bolt. Everything was ready. The Redford shipping container yard was located on the west side of the port, beyond the rusting cranes and sagging warehouses. I reached it within 15 minutes. The place looked like time itself had abandoned it. Tattered signs, battered flagpoles, heaps of containers piled like a giant's toy blocks. I parked the car in the shadow of a crumbling building and moved forward. Container C-17. Black. It had an old chain and a cheap lock hanging on it. But that wasn't what concerned me. Patrolling the perimeter were no fewer than 8 guards. Clad in dark clothes, rifles slung across their shoulders, grim faces scanning the surroundings. "Looks like a party without invites," I muttered, grinning. I moved silently, using the containers for cover. Step by step, closing in. The first one went down quietly. Just a swift grip from behind, hand over his mouth, and a knife shoved under his ribs. Warm and wet. He didn't even grunt. The second heard a faint noise and turned. Bad idea. I threw the knife. It sank right into his throat. He clutched the wound, gasped, and toppled over. The others started catching on. Shouts erupted. "Who's there?" "Moving on the right." "Check the sector." I kept moving. Unstoppable. Bullets whistled past as one of the bastards fired blindly. I dodged around a container and lined up a shot. A quick burst. Bullets tore through his thigh and chest. He dropped, flailing helplessly on the concrete. Another tried to flank me. I heard the gravel crunch and turned just in time. Rifle in my left hand, knife in my right. I shot him in the knee and hurled the knife into his gut. He howled, dropping to his knees, and I smashed the rifle stock into his skull. "You should have played soccer," I chuckled. "Too bad you won't be kicking anymore." 2 left. They hunkered down behind a tall container, firing blindly. I pulled a grenade from my belt. Time to raise the stakes, I said to myself, lobbing the grenade over the top. An explosion ripped through the air. Chunks of metal and flesh rained down. Silence. I stepped out from cover slowly. Everyone was dead. Only the wind whistled between the container rows. I approached the black C-17 container. The lock. The chain. One heavy blow with the rifle stock and the lock snapped. The doors creaked open. Inside, darkness. And Claire. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, bound with plastic ties. When she saw me, she froze for a moment. Then her eyes filled with tears. "Dad," she whispered. I rushed in, slashed the ties with my knife, and pulled her into my arms. "It's all right, baby," I said quietly. "It's over. I'm here." She sobbed, clinging to me like she used to when she was little. I gently lifted her to her feet. "Dad, I knew you'd come," she whispered, sniffling. "I would have carved a road through hell if I had to," I replied. We stepped out. The port was sinking into a gray dawn. I took her hand. "Let's go home," I said. And we left, leaving behind blood, the dead, and a life we would never return to. 6 months passed. We moved far north, a small town where no one asked questions, where life flowed slowly like a mountain stream. I found a job at a local factory, fixing equipment, patching motors, changing gaskets, and tuning machines. My hands were covered in grease, but my heart was finally at peace. Claire started a new school, made new friends. Laughter returned to our home. We rented a cozy little house out in the countryside. White walls, a big porch, an old tree in the yard where I hung a swing for Claire, even though she was nearly grown. She laughed when I did it, but still swung on it in the evenings. Sometimes we sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the woods, sipping sweet tea. "Dad," she said one evening, swinging her legs on the swing, "are you a real mechanic now?" "No," I chuckled, wiping my hands on a rag. "Just an old soldier patching up other people's mistakes." She laughed. "Then you're the best soldier." I smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. No blood, no bates, no constant fear of a knife in the back. Just life. Pure, honest life. We built it from scratch. And if anyone ever tried to take that piece away, I'd pick up the knife again. Because now I knew, real life begins the moment you're ready to die for those you love. But for now, there was the sunset, the warm wind, and my daughter's laughter. And that was all I ever needed.